I was very lucky as a child. I was so sporty, but I guess, you know, it's chicken and egg. Was I sporty, or did I get into sport through what was around me?
They say it's a matter of time, 1,000 days.
My granddad played rugby for Cardiff, and according to him would have played for Wales. If it wasn't for the war, who knows? I'm sure, I like to think that he would have done. My dad was a good sportsman, semi-pro footballer, etc. And they came with me to every tournament, squash-wise. You know, when my dad played cricket on a weekend and I was too young to play, and me and my granddad would be playing cricket on the outfield. I'd be running him ragged, you know, hitting everywhere, making him chase after it. And that grandparent relationship is something I cherished at the time, and now I see it being relived now that my dad's a granddad as well, and some of the games he plays with my little girl who's 3 now, you know, and it sort of brings me back to those great childhood memories, really. And I remember being in travel lodges with them snoring either side of me, and how am I going to get any sleep here? They're doing my head in. It was great that they both played such a big part in it, you know. I played lots of sports when I was growing up. Probably too many to mention, but I specifically remember a lot of tennis alongside the squash, and I probably at, you know, 12, 13, probably was not dissimilar standard for both. I played football for the school and sort of had Sheffield boys trials, didn't get in the team by the way, but I was decent at cricket, enjoyed captaining, that suited my personality, something always going on. I think if I'd have just been in the field I'd have been like that, but captaincy, I loved that. Looking back, I think squash suited my personality. It's an all-action sport. You know, you burn 1 million calories. You know, someone who's fidgeting all the time like me and wanting to do something on holiday, couldn't just lie there and relax. You know, you want to be doing sport and play, you know, even in the pool or jumping around. Like, squash seemed to satisfy my character. Tennis, I sort of got to a point where I really struggled, because you felt like you'd go into a tournament and you'd be sat in the car with your dad in between matches, just basically the two of you having some sandwiches, and there wasn't a camaraderie with the kids. It's almost like the tennis juniors saw you as a rival, whereas the squash juniors saw you as a friend. Everyone just welcomed me. I had lots of friends, and you tend to gravitate at that age towards, you know, what your friends are doing. I had friends from all around the country, and I couldn't wait to get to the weekend, and all the parents got on really well and would sort of have a beer after the matches, and win or lose, you know, there didn't seem to be the same pressure. You know, I remember growing up, my dad used to just say to me, as long as you give 110%, I'm not driving around the country for you to not try. We're only going to be here if you give 110%. After that, it doesn't matter if you win or lose, just have a good time. Looking back now, there was those little seeds were being planted that the sport was, it was sort of getting into me, and I wouldn't be able to shake it off after that.
I remember seeing Nick play the Yorkshire Premier League when I was playing, and he was 15 or something, 14, 15. And I just remember watching him play. I knew who he was, but I hadn't really seen a lot of him. I just remember thinking, like how much he volleyed it. He just volleyed everything. He just literally just wanted to volley everything. And he was this kind of thin, gangly little, quite tall for his age, but he was quite not that strong, and his technique was a bit, he used to break his elbow and all sorts of things. And I just remember thinking, but he volleys everything, and he had such an appetite, he played at such a pace. Just thought, well, God, if he can sort his technique out, he could be like, I was really impressed with him.
I was an ugly player. I was sort of all arms and legs. I remember at around 16 suddenly going through a growth spurt. So I was quite a sort of short, you know, 5 stone, like dripping wet, you know, like literally nothing to me, all skin and bones. And sort of could get bullied by a few players, actually. I remember in the under-16s, could do certain players I just could not beat. They just were physically stronger than me, and they would almost like hit me off the court. And I remember getting to about 16, and all of a sudden I matched them for strength overnight a little bit. And I guess the skills that I'd had to develop and a bit of the fitness that I'd developed then suddenly came through when I was on a par physically with them. And then I shot up in terms of my standard, went up really quickly. I just really remember at 16 suddenly really improving and going from just sneaking in England squads and being the sort of odd one out maybe, and playing 5 for Yorkshire, to suddenly being on the verge of being number 1 in England. We're here at Hallamshire, which is the home club I've had all of my life. played here from when I was 8 years old, 1988. There's a picture of me on this very court. It looks a bit dark and dingy there. It looks a lot nicer nowadays. Nice side part in there, going through the junior days. Dodgy haircuts, dodgy kit and all. Some real interesting kits coming through the years.
It's interesting hearing, because obviously you say about you're the world's most competitive person.
I'm second most now. My daughter's the most competitive person in the world. She was in swimming class the other day and she went to chase for these hedgehogs that float, and she got there first, brought it back to the far wall, and she was about 10 metres ahead of anyone else and went, "I'm the winner," like this. And I just went, I was like, but secretly I was like, I wonder what the other parents are thinking. There's a pushy parent over there. And I was sort of, secretly I was dead proud of her though. A bit embarrassing really. I feel like talking about things that my dad sort of installed in me, because I'm a parent now myself, so I see it from the other side, and you almost, I think it's every parent's nightmare to be called like a pushy parent. And when you say, oh, my dad installed the 3Ds, discipline, determination, dedication, it sounds like he was a pushy parent, and he wasn't, but it was because I wanted to do it. I guess in hindsight, with my sort of scatterbrain mentality, it was his way of sort of channeling my thoughts into a simple, it was sports, it was modern sports psychology in a nutshell, really. He knew that I wanted to do it. He was just making sense of the information and being like, if you abide by these 3 things, you've got half a chance, everything else will take care of itself. It seems like the people in my life, certainly growing up, were all, my first squash coach, my dad, those people close to me were all about that work ethic and stuff, and being the best you could be and putting 110% in all the time. So it seems like there was a bit of a continual theme there. But maybe that was my personality as well. So I don't know, I'm a Yorkshireman after all. We are quite. There's that Yorkshire grit, Sheffield Steel, it's been called at times.
Well, Nick used to come to national squads when he was about 10, 11 years of age, and he'd come every weekend or when we had the squads. And I always thought the one thing about him, I always looked him around, I thought his technique was horrendous. But the one thing he had was just this determination. That's the main thing that I noticed, was that will to win.
I saw Nick, I really saw him in terms of what he was able to do, I think at the World Juniors in Princeton in maybe 98, playing #1 for England. Very tenacious, volleyed the ball a lot, but I saw somebody that was just very much consumed by the game at the time, on the court. He just really, really bossed the game. Didn't always boss every rally, but really tried to boss the game. Apparently he hated to lose and was determined to get better and better and better, and had a different swing back then, because he underwent the swing change with David Pearson after that period, I think.
He had a big technical change with his coach, David Pearson, when he was probably about 18. Looking like he was going to be a good player, maybe potentially a top 10 player. But his sights were on being world #1. He wanted to be the world #1.
The changing of coach was still to this day like the hardest thing I've had to do in my career. It was something that doesn't sound that bad. Clearly it's not as big on the scale as, career-threatening injuries or things like that, but it's all I'd known since I was 10 years old. I was coached by Mark Hornby in Aberdell in Sheffield, and he was unbelievable for me. He was very much cut out the same mould as my dad, really. He was all about the discipline, the training, being fit, strong, bringing that out, and that suited my personality because I was into cross-country running as well when I was younger, and I used to sort of play on my fitness when I played squash. And Mark was an unbelievably top coach and did so much for me. I just got to a point when I was 18-ish and I was going professional that I just stopped enjoying that side of it, and I sort of felt it probably a year before I made the change, but maybe thought it was a phase, didn't realise I had to make a change, something as drastic as that.
So he was having coaching with Mark, then they had a problem when he was about 18 years of age, and I think he realised he had to change what he was doing to maybe push through the levels.
I'd been exposed to David Pearson, DP, on a lot of the national squads. He was a national coach at that time, and he's a very technical coach. It was something very different. Technically, I was probably a bit ugly. I was a bit someone who worked hard physically. It didn't look that great aesthetically.
And I think the one thing with Nick was he would always be a good player because he had that guts and determination. But would he have ever become a world number one or got to the world top 10? It just wouldn't have happened without that change of technique.
It was a massive wrench because it was all that I was known. My dad and Mark were really close. Mark travelled with me everywhere, and he was very much an all or nothing personality. And I knew that I had to make a clean break, you know, rip off the plaster, and it was tough because I knew that I was breaking his heart.
So he went through a big technical change on his backhand because he couldn't attack the backhand. He always had a good forehand, but he was almost like a one-sided player. So his backhand was very defensive, and he used to bend his elbow before he actually got the rotation. He used to break his wrist, and so his accuracy on the backhand was poor, and his strength and his power on the backhand wasn't great.
Basically, how we started was the first time he came over, I said, really, we need to totally sort of analyse your swing and your movement, and literally just change the whole package. And his face, he was sort of like this, thinking, oh my gosh, what do you mean? But I think in some ways, because he trusted me, he was prepared to do it. And we literally just spent hour after hour on a squash court, breaking every part of the swing down. And it was a complete change of his swing. And his movement, he was never a great mover. I can remember once Adrian Grant was over in the summer, and Adrian Grant was just like so smooth in his movement, and Nick was just like an elephant. And basically by the end of the summer, this is where he learned he was actually moving better than Adrian Grant was.
I remember even the first couple of years I was working with DP, there was certainly times when I felt like I had to take a step backwards before going 2 steps forward. And you know, even my dad was like saying, are you sure you're making the right move, in his own non-subtle way. It was a massive wrench to then change the way I'd hit the squash ball since I first picked up the racket 8 years old. I basically had to unlearn that whilst playing on the tour at the same time. You know, there was times when I wanted to not play tournaments whilst doing it, but I felt that then the learning process just wouldn't have been realistic. There was times when I had a session with DP where I tried to hit the ball and it just went into the lights. Bear in mind, I was probably top 100 player in the world when I went under that change. I was #1 in England in the juniors, and then you get to a point one day where you actually physically can't hit the ball. I changed how I held the grip, I changed everything with my technique, and it was some point I had no clue where the ball was going some days.
So we literally spent 5 years, I would say, totally taking down his movement and his swing from the point of the grip. Like, you know, you think that's a beginner's thing.
It's an unbelievably difficult thing to do. I didn't know that I was doing the right thing when I was doing it. I knew that DP had done it before. You know, you look at the past people that he'd coached and brought through, someone like Peter Nicola, who's an idol of mine. The thing that kept me going was that I started to enjoy my squash again. It was a long journey at times, especially with your ego. You start losing to people that you were beating before because you had to go backwards before you could go forwards, and it was a bit of a wrench, but best thing I've ever done. Hardest but best. My relationship with DP is, I think that most people would be amazed at our relationship in just how casual it is. We dovetail so well because he is so laid back, and he, you know, sometimes he'll turn up to your match 5 minutes before you're on, and he'll be like, okay, you're all right, yeah, good, and he'll disappear. You know, he knows that I'm very much focused, and I know it's very much like Laura Massaro as well. We both have our personalities that he just relaxes in. His favourite quote is that he coaches the person, not the player. He gets into sort of inside you, like the nitty-gritty of what makes you tick. It's not regimented every day. I've had sessions with him where we're there for an hour and a half, 2 hours on the court, and we've probably hit for 20 minutes of that. We go off on random tangents, and you're talking about tournaments and you're learning, but that's how the learning evolved, and that's one of the reasons I used to enjoy it so much, because it felt like you were learning the game, it felt like you were learning yourself, you were developing this relationship with somebody. I know that DP would have my back for everything, but he's not the type of person that will necessarily show it. He's certainly not overbearing. He's just, most of the time, he's just giving you a stick about something, or, you know, when I was younger, girlfriends, or, you know, the way I used to dress, or being an idiot or drinking too much one night and acting like a fool, or he's just spending most of the time just ripping the mick out of you. You know, the first session I went for him, he said, "You looks like you got a carrot up your bum," you know, because I used to sort of go like that after I hit the shot too much rather than smoothly going back to the tee. So he's never been one for conventional methods as David. We used to call him the demonstrator because he'd be trying to explain to you how to do things. We did a lot of video technology in the early days, and there was a lot of video analysis. There was something called quintic and dartfish, which broke your swing down into, you know, milliseconds, and you could see things that you couldn't see with the naked eye. And we'd be watching all this stuff. Stafford Murray worked for the English Institute of Sport, was there, and he'd come and we'd be filming everything from every angle, and then I'd try it 100 times from different angles with all this help, and DP had just picked the ball up, all he'd done is feed you all day, and then he'd just go, "This is how you do it," and the ball would just roll out the nick. He was calling the demonstrator. He had an unbelievable skill with the racket. He was just a bit physically a bit weak, DP.
I've got treetops under my head. I've got seasons under my bed. I've got troubles in the nighttime, troubles in the daytime too.
And the key in squash, it's not like tennis where you can travel with your entourage every tournament. You know, probably DP will come to me maybe 8 out of the 12 tournaments of the year. We've been very fortunate with England squash that they've enabled us to create an amazing team around us, and they've covered everything from strength and conditioning to nutrition to physio, massage, psychology support, etc. And almost by accident created this team and figured it out that then through an amazing psychologist that I've worked with called Mark Borden, worked out that there was 4 areas that you need to tick, and one was the physical, one was the tactical, one was technical, and one was mental. You can't be 10 out of 10 at all of them at all times, but you need to be minimum sort of 8. If you want to be the best in the world, you have to be at least 8 out of 10, 3 out of the 4, and then one of them needs to be 10 out of 10. I was never the world's best technician, never have been, never will be, but if I could get that to an 8 or 9, from when I started it was probably a 2, then the physicality, I had a phase where I was number 1 in the world, where the physicality, the mentality, the tactics were probably pushing 10 out of 10, and the technique was probably only ever an 8.
Do you have any specific goals for this year?
Yeah, they've changed a little bit after the last month. Before that, my target was to make top 20 and then maybe top 16, but now I'm looking to try and get top 10 by the end of the year.
I got it to a point where it unlocked my strengths, and that was the key to finding the people around you that would specialise in that area. So who are the people that are going to help you physically if you're feeling a bit short in that area? Who are the people that are going to help you mentally? Who are the people tactically? And who are the people technically? And of course they dovetail a little bit, but finding that team so a nutritionist obviously would help you physically and so on and so forth. And that was the key for me, again, simplifying the process.
Coming into the England system, all I've seen since day one is somebody that's always looking to get better, always looking to make little changes if they need to be made. Not afraid to be critical of himself, critical of his performances if they're not good enough. And I think, you know, that separates him from lots and lots of other people.
When I first sort of learnt about super strength, felt like sort of your eureka, you know, the light bulb goes off in your head and you're like, why have I never thought of this before? I think there was probably too much looking at weaknesses. And I guess that was probably born out of my technique was a weakness. I had to pull it up. That was totally true. You can't have a 2 out of 10 glaring weakness. But I'd got to a point where everything was 7 or 8 out of 10. But didn't have anything what my opponents thought I'm scared of.
And that's down.
I'd been between 5 and 10 in the world for probably 3 or 4 years, and I'd won a couple of titles, but I couldn't string any consistency together.
I think the tipping point for me, where I thought this world number 1 thing could become a reality, was when he had a shoulder injury and he was out for about 8 months. First real injury he'd had.
Had a labrum tear, which is basically a tear right into the top where your shoulder attaches into your bicep. And so Mark Borden, who's my psychologist, he tells me that, you know, squash tennis players, they play way too much. They don't get that chance to have that proper period of reflection, improvement, preparation again. I think he was just getting annoyed with me. He just sort of said, right, tell me one area of the game that you're the best in the world at. And I was like, well, what do you mean? He said, no, well, you know, what are your strengths? What would you say? And I said, well, you know, I think I'm a very good volleyer. I think I'm physically very fit. I think I've, you know, and he said, okay, are you the best volleyer? And I went, oh, I'm probably one of them. There's probably a couple of guys who would say maybe are better, but I'm up there. Are you the fittest? Well, again, probably, you know, 4th or 5th. He said, right, I don't want to see you again until you're the fittest or you're the best volleyer. And I went, what do you mean? He said, well, we need to start working on how we're going to turn those strengths into super strengths.
And he went over to Holland to play a tournament over in Amsterdam. And I remember going over with him, and he beat John White in the final after 8 months being out. And I can remember thinking, I could see a mentality shift. And I thought, right, there's a chance now that he could obtain that #1 position or become world champion or whatever. Up to before that, I probably didn't think that quite would happen for him.
That was the start of that whole rewiring of the way you approached it. Stop looking at what you're weak at and look at what you're good at and turn that into something that you're even better at, and it's a world-leading strength.
Probably at the moment, Nick.
Nick Matthew.
Nick Matthew.
Nick, maybe?
Nick Matthew.
Nick Matthew. Nick Matthew.
You know, he's constantly evolving when the game's evolving. He's constantly moving forward with his game when other people are moving their game forward. There's no resting place. And if you play somebody like that, if you know there's no resting place when they're not on the court, then you're pretty sure there's going to be no resting place when you're on there with them. And he certainly plays that way as well.
Always my motivator has been fulfilling my potential, leaving it all out there, making people proud. You know, there's been a couple of times in my matches this year where I've been in the middle of the match and I've felt a niggle's come back and I've not been able to play to my best, and you get into that frustrated zone. And I just imagine my daughter's watching that match, and it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to win, but you sort of behave in a way that doesn't bear what you're feeling inside, and you want to be like, that I can't do what I want to do because of an injury. And rather than get frustrated by it, you just smile and you just do your best and you shake the guy's hand and say, well done. And then privately out the back, you go around and smash about 15 rackets now.
Great volleying here from Matthew.
Look at this.
So tight on the backhand side. So it's within 2 floorboards. The majority of the hitting from Matthew. Oh my goodness me, I don't think he's going to get a let ball here. Matthew celebrates. I don't think that's a let ball.
I think it boils down to being able to look yourself in the mirror, being able to retire and look back and go, you know what, I gave absolutely everything there. Doesn't matter whether or not, you know, won or lost or whatever, or where I got ranked. Of course, everyone says, oh, I don't have any regrets, and it's different. There's some things that you go, oh, I could have done that differently with hindsight, but you don't regret it. That's been the key motivator for me, that sort of whole, you know, not looking back and thinking, oh, if only I'd have not gone out every Saturday night with my mates and, you know.
Oh, wow. Absolutely rolled there.
I was very lucky, I think, at the time when I was around #1 in the world. I was fighting back and forth with a guy called Rami Ashur, and for me, he's probably the most talented squash player of all time. You know, in terms of how he played the game and took the game to a different level, and so many injury problems, such a maverick, the charisma he played with, and somebody like Rami was constantly making me strive to get better on a day. You know, if you relaxed for even 1 second against him, you know, you felt the pinch. So he sort of forced me in practice day in, day out. There was a constant, you know, motivation to get better, because you knew that. And it was weird as well, it wasn't a thing with him that you knew we were so different. You didn't think, oh, I need to do this physical session because he's going to be doing this session. He probably trained a totally different way than I did, but you knew that you had to do everything that you had to do, because you knew that if you weren't at the best that you could possibly be, that he would kill you. I like to think that we did it to each other, but he certainly sort of made me rise to sort of new heights. You know, there's a time when I was at #1 and didn't feel like it, because I just felt like he was just too good. And sometimes you might beat him if you got lucky, but you know, he's an unbelievable player. Glasgow was possibly the most tumultuous, if that's the right word, like period in my life, really. My wife was expecting our first child, all the pressures of, becoming an expecting parent. I think, if I'm honest, Glasgow was always the thing that I thought would be my last thing. With squash not being an Olympic sport, the Commonwealth becomes our biggest thing. You can be world champion within your sport, but to me, it was the biggest thing that transcended our sport. BBC suddenly get an interest, people on the street take more interest in squash. So even though the field isn't the same as the World Championships that everyone's playing, it's still incredibly strong, by the way, in squash, but it just becomes something that's bigger than the sport, the Commonwealth Games. It's our Olympics, and it was a thing that I thought, that's going to be the last thing I do. That's going to be, I want to win a gold medal in Glasgow in my home games, carrying on the momentum that sport had in this country from London. That was the biggest thing. A few weeks before, I was on court with DP, my coach, and it was probably about 6 weeks before the games. We were having a really light session. It was totally techniques-based session. I was going to train hard the next day.
I remember being on court with him, and he came on court. I fed him a ball, just a normal backhand drive, came in to hit, put his foot down, and he said, "Oh, my knee." And I was like, "What's wrong with you? You're just a bit, He said, "No, I've done something." I said, "How can you do something to your knee?"
And I just remember something just clicking in my knee and sort of going down. And he thought I was being melodramatic as usual. We actually carried on the session, and I was complaining about my knee. I think a couple of days later, I went to a concert. I went to Kings of Leon, who are my favourite band in Sheffield, and I was walking, just happened to be walking up the steps, and I was sort of dragging my leg a bit, and I saw the doctor of the EIS came up behind me, and he went, "All right, Nick, are you limping?" And I was like, "Yeah, just my knee." And he said, he's a football doctor for Sheffield Wednesday, he's probably seen 1,000 meniscus tear, and he said, "Okay, come and see me, take you for a scan on that, just to check." I remember it to this day. I was sat outside with my foot up, icing my knee, and I got the call from the doctor. It's not good news, I'm afraid. This was probably now, told me when it had to go in for surgery, no other choice really, you can't play on with it. This was probably now, I had the surgery 4.5 weeks before, and it's usually 8 weeks minimum for meniscus. And immediately I was, you try to put the brave face on, but I was like, straight away I was like, oh my God. And then it was weird, I had the sort of 10 minutes of the world's ending sort of thing, and then I just sort of, it was like I just flicked the switch, I went, I don't know how I did it, I'm sure it was just me convincing myself of something I wasn't sure that I believed in, but I went, no, I'm going to do it, I'm going to win gold. The team like Jade, who was our physio in Manchester England Squash at that time, worked on a programme, get me emotional talking about this, working on a programme with my trainer Mark Campbell in Sheffield, and they were funny because Jade was very much, we're going to hold Nick back, we're going to wrap him in cotton wool, because I know what his personality is like, he's always going to want to do more, so she was still doing plenty, but she was holding me back. Mark was always like, we'll just do an extra one of this, just don't tell Jade, on not one of those like, oops, like, did he just do that? All right, we won't write that down, we'll just pretend that didn't happen. And so it was the perfect sort of Jekyll and Hyde almost combination, and I don't know how they did it. As I said, it seemed 24/7. I felt like at one point I was sleeping with the ice game ready machine attached to my knee. It felt like I was sleeping with it on at some stages. It was just constantly attached to me. My wife's heavily pregnant, and I'm sitting around the house making her do everything with my foot up like that. It was a bit ridiculous. And played a little practice game. I had to skip several rungs in the ladder. Couldn't do any preparation on court. I was able to hit for 15 minutes, I think I'd built up to. Then I was able to hit for 20 minutes on my own. Then it went down to 10 minutes with somebody else, and it was all these stages. It was brutally slow. I wasn't going to go to the opening ceremony. I love going to the opening ceremony and things like that because it makes you feel like it's something different than a normal squash event. You realise what you're in, it gives you that extra boost. Something I've been training to this for the last 4 years, so I'm excited to get going now. Wasn't going to go to opening ceremony purely because the amount of time you are on your feet, my knee would have swollen up. Got voted by Team England to be the flag bearer, probably the biggest honour off the court in my career. It was an unbelievable honour to be voted by your sort of fellow team members to do that, lead the team out in Celtic Park. Had to go then, of course. My physio followed me, Jade followed me around with a chair. So every time we walked 10 metres up to the stadium, waiting in the queue, I sat down. The rest of the team were behind, all standing up for 2 hours. you know, I think at that point, if they could have unvoted me, they would have done. It was embarrassing, you know, who's this guy I think he is? And I'm like, they obviously didn't want to tell everyone about my knee, you know, it was sort of not a secret, you know, the team members obviously knew, but he didn't want to publicly say how bad it had been. Ended up going through, it was a hectic week. I had my 100th cap for England. I played on my birthday, my opponent's also his birthday. First time I've ever had happy birthday sung to me by 2,000 people on a squash court. It was a bizarre week.
It's last Friday, just back from a knee operation which he had last month. How much do you imagine that he's been able to train? And is he in shape at this level against this guy?
He only had about a week where he was on court and was actually getting any kind of squash training and match practice. So will this play a part? It's possible, but again, both guys such great competitors. The momentum is swinging one way, then the other. Very difficult to predict who's going to win this.
This, the gold medal point.
And out. 10-5. Match ball.
Ended up winning the gold. There was 1 million people sort of watching on BBC, which is big for squash. With James Willstrop, 5-setter in the final, he'd also come through potential sort of retirement at one point. He was saying he had a hip injury, and apparently he was talking about the doctor advised him that he might be done. So we both were really proud of what we'd achieved that week, and ended up sort of winning gold. I think it was 4 weeks and 4 days after the surgery. In all the crazy celebrations I've done over the years, I think that was the sort of most random. I think I kissed my knee, and that was about as far as I think that was further range than I'd actually achieved the whole of the time. You know, like I barely got it up there because it was taped and locked in position, and that was probably my favourite of all victories. It was by far not my best performance. The final was like just the nerves, everything. You know, you're almost like start to realise what you might have achieved with all the background, and yeah, sorry I sort of went on a bit with that background, but I wanted to give it context, and it felt like it wasn't my best performance, but it was my best achievement.
Do you get time these days to sort of look back a little bit more than you would have done in the past and think about what you've achieved over the years?
I think, yeah, you do reflect more and more as you get a little bit longer in the tooth. Like I keep being told off for saying as you get older, because everyone says I mention possible retirement in every interview, so I'm trying not to do that, although I just did it. But I think I try not to. Obviously you do get reflective and, you know, sentimental, etc. But I try not to. I try to focus forwards, not back. But it's harder said than done, because you're always harping on about the good old days and all that sort of thing. Oh, when I could do this training and when I did that, and you have to remember actually, you know, you've got a good hand that you've still dealt with. I think my career, you could very much chart it sort of like sort of an inverted U, really, in the sense that you were sort of constantly learning all the way up. You get to the top when maybe you got to world number 1, then you have a point where, you know, you hold it, even if you improve it sort of goes a bit like that, you sort of hanging on. And then lately I've been trying for it not to fall off a cliff and just to sort of go down a bit more gradually, because there's no doubt that I'm not as good a player sat here today as I was probably 2 or 3 years ago. challenge for me at this point in my career is almost unlearning what I knew, because when I was at my best, I played a certain way and I prepared a certain way, and there was intensity to everything I did. And now I find that I can only have that same level of intensity over very short periods of time. Let's say if I focused on 2 main events a year, so there's certain times a year where I need to totally take the pressure off. I need to play with a smile on my face rather than a scowl. Everything I've learned and the template for my success, I almost need to like screw that up now, put that to one side, and actually, because I can't train the way I used to, I have to play the way that I'm trained for now and how I'm wired for now and what's going to keep me enjoying my squash and going for any longer. And that's the new challenge for me. If I met the 15 or 16-year-old version of myself, I would say get a better haircut. No, I'd say tell them to work on your technique. I would do it now. Don't wait till you're 19, 20. Do it now, because your technique is shocking. Get a grip. I would say don't forget what you're good at, because I think I lost track of that physicality side of things for a while I was focusing too much on the weaknesses. So build up, keep going with those strengths whilst you're doing it, and find a way to enjoy what you're doing always. I would love to be a coach. I don't know if I could be that sort of, full-time club coach all the time. I guess I've had too much of my own flexibility and been my own boss for too long. But I've started my own academy in 2016 that I'm proud of. A lot of the juniors had our first national champion this year in junior age groups, and lots of guys and girls who are sort of really improving and enjoying their squash. That's the main thing that I want to sort of portray is their enjoyment. And I love giving back. It gives you that different sense. If you go to a tournament in San Francisco and you do a session with the young players during the day, that you have to give back to the tournament. That's always fun, giving that something back and seeing their faces. And you might not realise how much they look up to you, but you remember when you were those young kids and someone came in to work with you, how much you love it. And I do love that feeling, but I think that I want to do other things and try and take squash all around, and hopefully coaching will be one of the strings to my bow rather than the only one maybe, but we'll see. We'll come back 10 years time and I'll be grinding out 15 hours a day coaching, and a bad bat, I'll be feeding the ball like this, and then you'll say, hang on a minute, Nick, you said you weren't going to do that. So we'll see.